Good afternoon and welcome once more to our Wednesday webinar, and thank you for joining us, whether you're watching us live or whether you're seeing this as a recording later on. My name is Tim Ferguson. I'm part of the ministries team at Baptist Together. Before we start today's webinar, please can I let you know about next week. So next Wednesday we won't be hosting a webinar on the Baptist Union YouTube channel. Instead, we are invited to join a webinar that is being organised by Fresh Streams. If you're not familiar with Fresh Streams, it's a national network that aims to equip and inspire and connect and resource leadership, especially across Baptist churches. So in their webinar next Wednesday, Andy Glover, one of the Fresh Streams leadership team, will be in conversation with ex-president of the BU, Kate Coleman, and the existing president, albeit only for a few more days, Ken Benjamin. And they're going to be talking about handling the current pressures faced right now by church leaders. And if you go to the webinars page on the Baptist Together website, you can find out how to join that discussion. But please be aware that places are limited and you will need to register for that webinar. It's a slightly different platform from the one we're using. However, back to today. This weekend should have been the Baptist Assembly in Bournemouth, and one event that would have taken place is the launch of a new resource. It's a worship anthology called Gathering Up the Crumbs. If I can just hopefully share a screen with you here. And hopefully you can see that picture there. That's the front cover of the book, and it's been written by Baptist women as a celebration or to mark the centenary of the ordination of women to Baptist ministry and their accreditation also. So I'm really pleased today to be joined by a number of contributors. First of all, we have Pat Took. Many of you will know Pat already, and now retired from ministry, living in Yorkshire, but of course most of her ministry was in London. And then we have a number of contributors to the book as well. And so we have Katrina. Katrina Gorton is Minister of Hillhead Baptist Church in Glasgow. We also have Gail Richards, who is in Zion Baptist Church in Cambridge. And we have Claire Nichols, Minister of New Addington Baptist Church in Croydon. So can I just say welcome to all of you. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Pat, who's going to take us through just a bit of an introduction to the book before she asks questions of those who have contributed.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a real delight to have a look at this book. I wasn't involved in contributing anything to it, so it all came fresh to me. And I was most impressed by the variety both of contributors and of contributions. So the people who have contributed to this book are all Baptist ministers of one kind or another. There are ministers in training, there are regional ministers, folk from the colleges, there are evangelists and pastors who have all contributed to this book. And they've contributed in a variety of styles and with various different theologies and opinions and approaches. And we've ended up with an anthology of prayers and meditations and reflections and hymns and liturgies, which should offer to most people something new and something provoking and something encouraging that can be used by them in the personal life, personal devotion with small groups, or indeed in the conduct of worship. So it's a wide range, and that variety seems to me to be entirely appropriate because it expresses the variety there is among us. So I've been delighted to have a look at it. I did find myself thinking, well, out there is an enormous range of worship resources and possibilities already, both published on the net, in books. And I wondered who the editors felt this was particularly for, who they hope will use it, who they hope will pick it up and work with it. So I wonder if I could ask, first of all, Gail, who has been involved in this, who do you see using this book?
So Pat, I would say anyone involved in leading public worship, as you've said, it could be a Sunday morning service, it could be a midweek small group for adults or young people. I think one of the things I'd like to say, it's definitely not just for women and girls. So I think it's really important that we make that clear. It's for everyone. And as you've said, because of the variety in the book, the variety of the materials, from the range of theological positions to the range of contexts that women are writing from, it means literally there is something in it for every single church in our union. So that's where I'd start. There'll be some material that will fit perfectly. And so anyone leading worship might take out one of the blessings, for example, and say, yes, we can use that perfect fit just as it is. I think others will want to adapt it for their context based on the season they find themselves in. I mean, at the moment, the season we find ourselves in, we're adapting many things and actually writing new and creative stuff as well. And I think that's the hope, that it will inspire people to write original stuff as well. So it's a great starting point. There'll be issues covered within it that are quite hard to find resources for. I know you mentioned that it could be used, for example, for personal devotion. And there are some great pieces in there. If you think about some of the pastoral situations people find themselves in,
Yes.
I'm thinking particularly about the section on say, stillbirth, miscarriage. You can easily see someone giving a piece from the book on, say, one of those areas for someone to contemplate on, and it would help them perhaps find the words to articulate what they're feeling. So I can see a wide range of people, as I say, anyone involved in leading public worship, midweek groups. I think it can be used with adults, young people, ministers, people who are lay. So quite open and varied, I think, to answer your question.
Yes, thank you. And of course, quite a lot for all age worship. We're working with children as well.
Absolutely. Creative pieces in there.
Yeah, yes. Thank you. I'm glad you stressed that it was not just for women to use, although it has been written entirely by women, and it is celebrating the centenary of the ordination of women. But I always find myself in a bit of a dilemma about women's only things, things that are designed by women or for women. And I wondered about this notion that maybe there is a specific women's voice, or whether because of the life situations that women find themselves facing, they have a different range of emphases, a different voice that they bring to the conduct of worship. Why women specifically? Why not men and women all together? And Katrina, you were involved in the opening up of this. How do you feel about this issue? I mean, I have to be honest, I have avoided conferences that are women only quite often, sometimes because the range that they expect you to cover is so narrow. But tell us why you feel a women's book is important.
Sure. I'm totally with you. It's a really important question to ask, why a book of women's writing? I have lots of books on my shelves that I use to resource me for worship. Some written by all women, some written by all men, mostly written by a mixture.
Yes.
If I can be a little bit cheeky, I'd like to say why this collection of women's writing rather than why women's writing in general, and open up a little of the story about how this book came to be written.
Mm-hmm.
And to do that, we need to actually travel back in time a century to around about 1918. And it's been really interesting this week to think about what was going on in 1918. That was the year that men across the board over 21 were given the vote, and women over 30, if they had certain property qualifications, were given the vote. It was the year of the Spanish flu pandemic, and it was the year of the armistice at the end of the Great War. So a very turbulent and changing time. And something went on in that year that nobody noticed. a woman by the name of Edith Gates was appointed as the minister to a couple of little churches in Oxfordshire. And she was the first woman who, along with Violet Hedger, who was around about the same time, went to college a year later, they were the first two women to be recorded as accredited Baptist women ministers. I could bore you about how their stories intertwine with mine because of places I've lived and times and things, but I won't. Time doesn't allow for that. But since those two women in the early 1900s, in a time of pandemic and change around gender, around work, around violence, about post-war things, there has been a whole succession of women who have come into ordained Baptist women's ministry. And in 2018, it was felt it would be good to get some of us together. And it was wonderful. I was invited down to Birmingham. Some of you, well, most people listening won't know I'm actually in the Baptist Union of Scotland, not the Baptist Union of Great Britain. And we shared a marvellous time together, celebrating the diversity of which Gail speaks and you have spoken. Women of colour, women who are white, women who have been in ministry a long time, women who are new to ministry. And out of that gathering emerged a social media network of purely women in Baptist ministry. And that's self-defining. If you defined yourself as a woman in Baptist ministry, you're welcome to join that group. And in one of my crazy moments, I dropped an idea into the group and said, I've got 20 years worth of services on my computer. Some of them might be of use to other people. I was regularly being asked, has somebody got a liturgy for closing a building? Has somebody got a liturgy for dementia? Has somebody got an all-age communion? Well, if I had them, surely other women had them. So I dropped in the idea and waited to see what happened. And it was overwhelming. It's been a really wonderful experience to collect this material from women who are so diverse and so accepting and celebrating of each other. And all of it is about honouring God. The God who called Edith and Violet 100 years ago, and the God who calls us now. So we do offer it genuinely to men and women, young and old, personal and private, but it felt right in this moment to create this collection of women's writing.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. So it really is celebratory of this centenary. It's this particular event and the courage of the people who are the pioneers for us that we wanted to mark with this group, with this book. I did ask you, yes, I did ask you yesterday whether you envisaged doing another one, but you said absolutely not.
Well, one of my college tutors used to always say, never say never. It's been a wonderful experience. It's been very much a learning experience. And I'm sure when we get to the other side, as we keep saying at the moment, of the current situation, there will be, from men and women, lay and ordained, there will be wonderful stuff to collect. But I feel that's somebody else. Somebody else can run with that one.
Okay then, Katrina, we'll let you off that one. One of the things you mentioned there, which I was very aware of when I was reading these reflections, was the fact that a number of them deal with quite difficult and painful issues. And I did wonder whether perhaps part of what we can offer, excuse me one moment, I need to find the... Part of what we can offer, or what we do offer to the wider church, is a willingness to look openly and honestly at painful and difficult issues that maybe haven't been spoken of publicly before, or that are too painful to put into an act of worship. There was one in particular that I was very moved by, except that I'm not sure if I can lay my hand on it, which is about dementia. And dementia obviously is an issue that many people have to cope with, and they have to cope with it in their parents, and eventually maybe they have to cope with it in their partners. And I was very moved by the by Sally Fox's Reflections on Dementia, which I would like to read if I can track it down here. It's in one of these pieces of paper, which I can't track down.
I can find it for you. It's on page 53.
Yes, I don't have the book, you see. It hasn't come.
Okay.
It may have gone to Yorkshire, quite possibly, but it certainly hasn't come here, which has left me. I had it printed out.
This is the one for the lady whose elderly husband needs to live in a care home.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, I
Would you
thought
like me
that.
to read it?
Yes, please. I thought that was a particularly moving and beautiful reflection.
It is indeed, yeah. So this is entitled "For a Lady Whose Elderly Husband Needs to Live in a Care Home Due to Dementia," and it's written by Sally Fox. I let him go from our old life into his new life, a new life that will one day give way to eternal life. I let him go into the care of others. One day I will let him go into the care of the eternal God who had cared for him since before the dawn of time. From the fullness of our lives together, I let him go into the smallness of the life he must now live alone. I let him go into the place I can only visit, unable to know where his soul waits or what is its purpose. I let him go, but I feel left behind. He now dwells alone alongside the Leith River, while I am stuck alone in the old world of our normality, still living among the familiar things and watching the garden grow.
Thank you for reading that. It was one of a number of reflections that did tackle the really tough things, stillbirth, loss of various kinds, Sandra Crawford, some problems concerning self-esteem and people who grew up without any self-esteem. So there was quite a lot of painful stuff in the anthology. It's not all painful. There's a superb reflection of head louse that lived on Goliath's head, which was most entertaining. But I'm wondering whether it was something which an anthology of women's writing might particularly draw to people's attentions. And I wondered whether Claire would like to make any comment on that.
Thank you. Yeah, I noticed that as well when I read it, that the writing really arises from people's experience and often painful experiences. And I've been reflecting a little bit on this and why women in particular might be able to speak about these experiences more readily. And a lot of them are not about fixing the pain, but they're about walking in the pain, lamenting in the pain, and rising up despite the pain, and Jesus sitting with us in the pain. And in places it is very raw, but there are a few things in there that I can imagine that the people who I've walked with at different times, their words that they may have said. So it's very relatable in that. The first, there's lots of reasons why that might be, and the first reason is one that needs to be said, although I don't want to just think through all the stereotypes with this.
Yes,
but they're often more open about their feelings, and whether that's something to do with society and the way we are, or whether that's something to do with our nature, is something to be argued somewhere else. But it is evident that women are more open about their feelings, and it's been particularly evident more recently when we've been reacting to this current crisis, and the different reactions in different support networks. So where there is a support network that is mainly female ministers, I know it was particularly noticeable that lament came first, and on that first Sunday when we couldn't meet, the pain was expressed really well. Whereas in those groups where there were more men in it, they tended to be more about solutions to the crisis,
Yes.
rather
Yes.
than lamenting the crisis. And actually, it's more recently, in the last couple of weeks, that the quieter male voices have been louder in those groups as they've picked up on the lament, and their voices have been heard. And actually, the mood has changed, I think, a little bit in the last few weeks. So that's the first reason that women often express their emotions more. The second reason that we reflect as a group together yesterday even is that women ministers often tend to be leaders in communities and churches that are more broken, or called places that are more broken, where hidden things have been brushed under the carpet for a long time and they need to rise to the surface. So honesty is so important in those situations. Honesty in the painful experiences. The rawness needs to come out because those things haven't necessarily been dealt with. So perhaps there's something about a woman's ability to identify the beauty in the brokenness because of their context, and that enables the conversations of hope amongst the pain to happen as well. And maybe women thrive more in broken places because they're able to bring out that hope amongst the pain. I was reflecting on the creation narrative and the narrative of the fall, and how in Genesis 3, the pain that the women were to experience from that was very much an internal pain, a physical and an emotional pain that reflects kind of the groaning of creation in the fall. And maybe that might be one of the reasons why we're able to speak from our painful experiences, because we feel it with our whole body. There's particularly things that affect women that you feel it both physically and emotionally. So that may be a reason why. But it is interesting that in the book, those things come out. And my kind of own writing, it comes from my own context, and my writing tends to arise from whatever is happening at the time. I'm writing quite a lot at the moment because there's something going on that affects us, and it hurts, and we want to lament, but we want to look for messages of hope. And one of the pieces that I wrote that's in the book is called God's Comfort Blanket. Yes. And I'll read that in a minute, but I just want to give you a bit of background to it. So I wrote it in April last year, and it was one of those days when I was carrying far too much. I was meant to be on holiday, but I wasn't for a number of reasons. And I was sitting in the garden centre trying to process all the things that were going on. There was some news I'd heard. I was getting ready to move. There was a big thing going on at the time, and somebody who I was working with had got ill, and the pressure on me was quite great. And one of the images that's always inspired the way that I care for others is that image that goes around of someone sitting under a blanket. And the idea is not to just take that blanket away or find a way to fix them. It's just to sit with them underneath the blanket and be with them in their pain. And that image kind of resonates with Psalm 91 and being under the shadow of God's wings, under God's wings. And thought about that. I thought about a toddler with a comfort blanket and how that reassures them, the familiar reassures them through difficult stuff. And also I was thinking about, there was my friends in Skipton at the time were wrapping blankets around people and praying the prayer of St. Patrick's breastplate over people as they wrap the blankets around them. And I was just thinking through all of those things. And thinking how God was with me, and it's the same with all these painful stories. The painful stories, they're told not because we need to be fixed. It's just a way of expressing how we feel in this, a way of being heard, a way of expressing that there is hope beyond this. But sometimes we just need to sit under that comfort blanket and know that everything is going to be okay. So if it's okay, I'll read that now.
Yes.
May the arms of God surround you with the fibres of his warmth. May his comfort blanket enfold you as you shelter in his wings. May the strength of God's embrace protect you as the fleece and wool surround you. May you feel his love, his peace, as you rest in his arms. May you gradually unravel as the threads ravel round you. May you begin to let it go and feel release in his grace. May the arms of God surround you, protect you, and enrobe you. May his comfort blanket soothe you as you shelter in his wings.
Thank you. Thank you. What you said there suggests that having a resource which does face some of these tough and painful things might be quite liberating for some of our men ministers who will possibly struggle to find words for some of these experiences. Clearly, there are also some experiences which are specifically female, and again, it's a valuable thing for people to have a resource to cover some of the experiences they can't have and will never have. And so I wondered whether Gail might at this point pick up for us on, I know there's a one of the contributions that she was particularly moved by. A lot of the contributions in this book are reimaginings of biblical stories, and people putting themselves in the place of some of the characters that we read about in the Bible. And there are a wonderful range of these, including people that we would never think of. But Gail picked up particularly on the woman with the hemorrhage. Would you be willing to read that for us, please, Gail?
Okay, so this is by Gina Kendall, from Mark chapter 5, verses 25 to 34. And this is how it reads. It had been 12 years, over 4,000 exhausted days, more than 96,000 wretched hours, my body leaking all vitality and sapping my spirit as I trudged wearily through each day, praying for a relief which never came, so that in the end I despised that part of me which was meant to bring life. Worse even than the draining away of hope was the humiliation by those men, year after year, claiming they could help, but bringing me only shame. Cheeks burning as I looked to the empty sky, no rescue from their intrusive hands, and eyes which either pitied or lingered just a little too long. Hope had long since seeped away, the day I heard tales of the rabbi, but I had nothing to lose. And so, knowing I breached every convention and the law of a God I no longer trusted, I reached out to touch him and knew at once that everything had changed. But healing became terror as he exposed my desperate encounter, and I waited for the rebuke that would reignite my disgrace. But it never came, and so I told him the truth, and I knew he saw beyond my faltering tale to the broken reality my life had become. And in return for my abject honesty, gifted to this stranger, he spoke words of wholeness, going beyond the healing of my body to free me to be the woman that I was born to be.
Thank you. I know that was one that you found particularly moving, and Jeannie also wrote a reflection on the woman at the well, and a whole range of different biblical characters. And that's one of the great strengths of the book, I think, that it has this very strong biblical theme running right the way through it, through meditations, reflections, prayers, hymns with suggested tunes, which was very helpful, I thought, and some lovely images too. So all of that is in there. Now, it may be that there are people who have contributions they would like to make, who've perhaps read some of this material or would like to comment on what they've learned so far. So I think that's over to Tim to see if there are any live comments that have come in.
Yeah, so I just step in for a moment. So do you want to encourage those who are taking part to add your comments and questions in the box on the right, in the comments box, and Pat will moderate a conversation amongst our contributors in response to those. At the moment, we've just had some very positive ones, which I think you can see, Pat. So encouraging that if you just click on your comments on the right-hand side of your screen, then you should be able to see the ones that come in. Most of them are just saying who is here, and good to see. I think almost all the people there are are women, and not all of them, because certainly Ken Benjamin, I see Ken is contributing as well,
Yes.
and saying that he appreciates the resource. But if you've got any questions, please do post them up. As we wait for that, Pat, if there are any questions you want to ask contributors yourself, then fire away while we wait for some perhaps to come in from the folk who are viewing.
I'd like to share a short reflection on the wife of Cain. And this is one of the characters that appear in this book, who are there all the way through the Bible, but you just never think about them. I had never thought of the wife of Cain before, but Jeannie wrote a reflection on the wife of Cain, which I think is very powerful. She writes, "The guilt devoured him in the end, eating his soul. Despite adrenaline-fueled building, despite our children's smiles, despite me, despite everything, nothing was enough. He wore his self-reproach more clearly than the mark he said God had promised. Not a badge of honor, but a sign of shame. His anger somehow tempered by his fear, always terrified an eruption would again, volcano-like, envelop his inner world and destroy a life in one way or another. And as many women do, I absorbed it all, holding my peace to try to gift him his." I found that very moving, that sense of somebody struggling with an inner volcano, trying to hold on to the intensity of emotion that could create such violence. I found that a very moving one. I don't know if any of the other folk here have found things that particularly touched them.
There's such a great richness, isn't there, there are the really deep, provoking, painful stories, but there are some that are just hugely funny.
Yes.
And it's great to have those as well. And I'm not going to read them because they're far too long. There's a lovely set in the Advent and Christmas section written from the point of view of animals.
Yes,
so
yes.
We've got this donkey who's just a typical Eeyore donkey. We've got a camel who's got the hump. And just that reimagining of the story from maybe slightly left field is just so helpful to go and look at those stories afresh and begin to think, what else has God got to say to me through this very familiar story? Okay, we know there weren't camels or a donkey or whatever, but actually it doesn't matter because the stories take us to a place of truth.
And presumably a lot of people do this kind of thing anyway as part of their normal, well, particularly at Christmas, you do all kinds of things, don't you? But hopefully folk who've never tried to do this might be given a prompt to think, well, I wonder what it was like to be somebody in this story. This is a very ancient pattern of meditation, I know, where you imagine yourself into a gospel story. And it's also very revealing, I think, of you yourself as to where you see yourself in that story. I've always been interested when I've done this to find that I'm always just outside the circle looking in. I thought, well, I wonder why that is, but you might find yourself always being the person on their knees, or always being the one offering comfort, or always being the one asking the awkward questions. But it is a powerful way to make the biblical story powerful for you now, I think. Explore what other dimensions it might have.
Yeah.
Pat, can I just pick up on a couple of the comments coming in? So somebody's asked where you get the book from, which is a very valid question, of course. So it is available on the Baptist Together website shop, and it's priced at £15. And if you look at the chat, I have put a link in there for you if people need to just follow that. So that's where you can get it from. There's also some interesting comments. Certainly, one person is saying it's sad that not that many men are contributing, apparently, to this webinar as far as we can see, although, of course, they may be in the background and not quite willing to put their head above the parapet. But interesting comment from Liz Connolly here. already given a copy to a male minister as a gift. It's a great book, very well produced, to make a great worship resource. And perhaps we could comment on this one. So one that's come in from Robin, who is Robin Owen, saying, we haven't much mentioned all the different liturgy there is for lots of different occasions, including those who can't find material for elsewhere. Rather, I suspect that's actually from Carolyn, sorry, not from Robin using his name perhaps there. So if somebody wants to comment on that, that would be helpful perhaps.
Well, if I can pick up on the endings in church life, because I contributed a couple of those. We have a number of women ministers who have helped churches through quite painful endings. I've helped 2 churches through closing of buildings for very different reasons, very different congregations, very different contexts. There's also a liturgy from a woman who actually took a church through its final ever service. Beautiful liturgy by Jane Robson, well worth a look. Centered around sharing cake together. It's fantastic stuff. We've also got one that I wrote for conclusion of pastorate, and some prayers that somebody else wrote for retirement. So we think that's a unique section, the section on endings in church life. So that's just one of the examples of slightly different liturgy.
I was particularly pleased to find material for Remembrance Day, which I've always found very difficult. But there's some good material there, thoughtful material, and I think a hymn for Remembrance Day. So it was lovely to have that in there. And as you say, particular life events, obviously a funeral for a dead baby or a stillbirth, that is something that people have to cope with. They have to find somehow words of comfort and hope in those circumstances. So this book could be very helpful for folk facing up to things that maybe they haven't personally experienced, but they have to, one of the things that ministers have to do, isn't it, articulate on behalf of others. And this book helps us to do that, to articulate unexpected and difficult issues.
Yes, there's a comment come in saying exactly that, really. Both reflections read were beautiful and far better I could write myself. This is Brian Davison saying this, and he says, in pastoral situations, it can be better to read something written by another than to try and pray extempore. And I think that maybe is the benefit of the resource.
I was just thinking also, in terms of the variety, some of the issues that are covered, and thinking about pastoral situations, thinking about girls, women, male ministers, picking up on the point there in terms of having something to read or refer to. How do we connect real life issues? The one I read on the woman hemorrhaging, how do we connect real life issues to the things that young girls, women are going through? And I think it can be an invaluable resource for a male minister who feels out of his depth.
Yes.
The importance of having women's voices in a book like this can be used in so many different ways by so many different people.
Yes.
I also just want to introduce a comment here from Ruth Wood, because I'm totally with this. There was a beautiful piece about childbirth being compared to God's creation. And again, just some insights you wouldn't see elsewhere in that particular piece of work. It was superb. Claire, I think you're about to come in there, were you?
Yes.
No, sorry.
One of the parts I've found particularly helpful is reflecting on Mothering Sunday, because often Mothering Sunday is a really hard Sunday in church because everyone's in different positions in life. Some have struggled to be mums, some are mums, some are can never be mums, and the fact that there's a number of different prayers in there is really helpful. And there are always things that for me I've written for myself, and so to draw on other people's experiences is really helpful in that.
Yes, I thought that was very helpful as well, because we can slide into assumptions which are entirely inappropriate and very painful sometimes. I know issues of singleness are not very often addressed helpfully in church, and certainly issues of people who don't have children. There are a lot of the hymns we sing and the things we say make assumptions which can sideline people painfully. So yeah, I thought that was very good to have that mixture. Mm. So you think maybe the next anthology is going to be one about coronavirus? What does it mean to be locked down? So we have
not necessarily about coronavirus per se, but there is some interesting and more broadly applicable stuff. You know, the idea of lament. Some of the stuff that is being written by women and men to express lament is really important, and
Yes.
there's a dearth of that out there. And there are always times for lament for some people and some churches and some communities, even if the rest of the world seems to be going along swimmingly.
Yes.
So definitely a place for some of those. I don't want to push my covenant for troubled times. It's been pushed by the Baptist Union about 3 times already.
I'm not surprised. It's really prophetic.
If I can just briefly share the story of that. That was actually written for my first church in Leicestershire, who ran out of money to pay me. And it was a deeply painful time for me and for them, because we were sure that God had brought us together. But at the turn of that year, it was really important for us to covenant together and say, well, this is difficult. We're struggling, but we hold on to the promises.
Yes.
And I think there will be more writing of that ilk will come out of this time, as people have to do theodicy, as people have to work out what it means to believe in a good God when the world is really painful and there are no answers.
Yes. That would suggest that we're moving into a time when we have a more incarnational theology, a more realistic church life. This has to be good, I think. This has to be very positive. Amanda Pink, who made some lovely contributions, wrote this: remind us this is the desert. Remind us this is just the desert, that on the other side lies the promised land. Remind us that this aimless wandering really is part of a bigger plan. For the journey from slave to free is not just A to B, but learning to understand. So though it feels like running on sand, remind us this is just the desert. So there again, it's kind of a lament, but with a hopeful dimension to it. So Tim, are there other things that you feel we should be exploring?
I'm just looking at the comments that are coming in. Again, people saying how much they appreciate the resource and pointing out what it contains within it: liturgy for infant blessings and affirmations for those without faith. Somebody's asked whether it's available as a PDF, and that's being considered, but that's not decided at the moment. So I'm afraid if you do want it at present, you will still have to buy the book itself. And others just saying that they're inspired to not only hearing the pieces, but also maybe to have a go themselves. So people who might take this resource and think, well, I also can write liturgy for my own circumstances. When I say liturgy, I'm using that in the broadest sense. It may just be a poem, a reflection, a piece of writing, a reimagination of a biblical story, or whatever. So I'm sure all the contributors here would encourage others to try themselves, to do their own work in that.
Yes.
Well, we're approaching this at the end of our allotted 45 minutes, and so no further questions have come in. There was one more, I think, that was going to be read, Pat, is that correct? There was a further poem, again by Amanda Pink, I think. I'm just looking at my notes here. Is that right?
Permanent present tense, yeah.
And who was going to read that?
Yes, indeed. Yes, this was,
That was Katrina.
we had hoped that we would have Sarah Bingham with us, but the technology let her down. But she particularly loved this one. And so I think Katrina's going to read it for us. Yes, permanent present tense.
Thank you. Save us, Lord, from living in a permanent present tense, with our constant rushing from one deadline to the next. Not living for each moment so much as just about surviving it. Forgive us for when we dismiss too quickly what has gone before. For when our preoccupation with the now and our eagerness for what is next blind us to the significance of what you have already done. You are helping us to see. The past is a gift, a great and precious library of case studies to be explored and learned from and built on. And you are the knowledgeable librarian, showing us where to look and helping us to understand, training us in this art of holy remembering. For what we learned yesterday is the compass to navigate tomorrow. And it is in celebrating the past that we awaken the future.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well,
I think Jim was going to close with one of the many blessings in the book, were you not?
I will. I've just a couple of things to say first. But first of all, thank you to Pat and to Gail and to Katrina and to Claire for sharing their thoughts on the book, both as authors and as readers. So thank you so much. So I'm just going to conclude with one or two notices. As I say, if you do want to get hold of the book, just a reminder, go to the website. And you can find it on the shop that is on our BU website. And also a reminder that the recording of this webinar will be available afterwards. So if you want to point other people in its direction, then please do so. And a reminder also, again, just next week, we're not hosting a webinar on the Baptist Union YouTube channel, but there is a Fresh Streams webinar. And you can join that at the usual time, 1 p.m. on Wednesday. And Andy Glover will be in conversation on that occasion with Ken Benjamin and Kate Coleman. But if you go to the webinar page on our website, there will be some indication of how you can register for that webinar next Wednesday. Also, we have another prayer broadcast tonight at 7 p.m. With Lynn Green and Steve Tinning, who is our interim public issues enabler and a minister at Lee Road Baptist Church. So I think probably that's what I need to say, but I'm going to finish with a blessing from the book, Gathering Up the Crumbs. And this is written by Claire Hooper. So as we conclude today, may you see opportunities to bring hope, healing, and peace where others do not. May you have the courage to speak up for those that get overlooked. May you be aware of God's Spirit at work in the words you speak, the safe spaces you create, and the relationships that you build. You are loved by God. May those that you encounter know that they are loved too. And with that, we'll say amen and goodbye for now.